If you discovered like a toxic chemical leak in your office, one that was actively eroding your coworkers' brain tissue and accelerating their cellular aging,
Yeah.
I mean, the building would be evacuated immediately.
Right. Oh, absolutely. There would be lawsuits, federal interventions, people would go to jail, the
Right.
whole 9 yards.
Exactly. But right now, according to the data, between 10 and 30% of the workforce is exposed to a hazard that does exactly that.
Yeah, it's a staggering number when you actually look at it.
And instead of evacuating the building, we just call it, interpersonal conflict. We send people to like a mandatory conflict resolution training. So, okay, let's unpack this.
We really need to because it is a massive blind spot in occupational health right now.
Right. And today we're looking at a whole stack of recent neuroscientific and epidemiological research that shows sustained workplace abuse is a severe biological hazard.
Yes. For decades, we've treated abusive behavior at work as this behavioral problem, a soft issue that just gets filed away in a human resources cabinet somewhere.
Just a symptom of a bad boss.
Yeah. Exactly. But when you look at the actual data we are exploring today, you realize this isn't about hurt feelings at all. I mean, it's about actual structural brain damage.
Which is wild. And I am thinking about you, the listener, who might be commuting to a job you absolutely dread right now.
Yeah, it's a very real situation for a lot of people.
It's one thing to say, my job is stressful. But how do you know if you're experiencing normal friction with a demanding boss or if you're in an environment that is actively causing this kind of neurological harm? Like, where's the line?
That is the critical first question, because before we get into the brain science, we have to define the hazard clearly.
Right. We have to know what we're actually looking at.
Right. We're not talking about a manager who just has a bad Tuesday or someone who gives you blunt, maybe overly critical feedback on a project.
Because that's just work.
Right.
It's annoying, but it's work.
Exactly. Legitimate performance management, even when it's handled aggressively, is fundamentally designed to correct behavior and improve your output.
Okay. So how is bullying different?
Bullying operates on a completely different framework. What's fascinating here is that the intent is entirely different. It is designed to isolate, to diminish, and systematically exclude the target.
It's like the difference between a sudden rainstorm and water torture. I mean, it's not the volume of the water, it's the relentless, inescapable dripping.
That is a perfect way to put it. The clinical definition actually relies on three main components: repetition, duration, and a power imbalance.
Okay, so repetition meaning how often?
The hostile acts have to occur weekly, at a bare minimum, and persist for 6 months or longer. It's progressive escalation.
Oh, wow. Half a year of weekly attacks. What does that actually look like day to day?
Well, it usually starts with subtle things, right? Being deliberately left off important emails, or having your core responsibilities quietly reassigned without any explanation.
So you're just sitting here wondering what you did wrong.
Exactly. Or dealing with persistent rumors that attack your professional competence.
And the power imbalance part, does that mean it's always a boss attacking a subordinate?
Not necessarily. I mean, the power imbalance can be formal, like a manager leveraging their authority, but it can also be socially constructed.
Wait, socially constructed, like a mean girl situation, but in the office?
Basically, yeah. A group of peers can socially isolate a single coworker, cutting them out of the information loop to the point where the target literally cannot do their job or defend themselves.
That's horrifying. And I noticed in the research that certain sectors kept coming up as hotspots for this, like healthcare, higher education, public administration. Why those fields specifically?
It really comes down to the structure of those organizations. Those sectors often feature incredibly steep, rigid hierarchies combined with severe resource scarcity.
Like a hospital ward facing budget cuts, right?
Exactly. When you throw people into a pressure cooker with high demands and low resources, and then you introduce reward systems that pit employees against each other in a zero-sum game, interpersonal aggression actually gets weaponized.
Oh, I see. So it becomes a twisted survival strategy for people just trying to climb the ladder or even just protect their own jobs.
Yes. But the toll it takes on the people at the bottom of that ladder is devastating.
Well, I want to look at what happens to the person on the receiving end of that strategy. In the sources we gathered, there was a study looking at actual brain scans of people who had been subjected to this kind of sustained abuse.
Ah, yes. The Nolf study.
Honestly, the results shocked me. What exactly did they find was happening to the physical hardware of the brain?
You're referring to the 2018 study by Nolf and colleagues. They took patients diagnosed with work-related adjustment disorders, which is essentially workers who had been severely bullied.
Right, and they ran neuroimaging scans on them.
Yes, and they compared them to healthy controls, and they found literal physical atrophy in the brain. Specifically, the hippocampus had significantly shrunk in volume.
I want to pause on that because it's terrifying. When you say atrophy, you mean the brain tissue is physically deteriorating. How does a bad environment translate into missing brain mass?
To understand the mechanism, we have to look at the body's primary alarm system, the HPA axis. That stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Okay, the HPA axis, what does it do?
When you encounter a threat, this system floods your body with a hormone called cortisol.
Right, the stress hormone.
Exactly. In an acute situation, say you have to swerve to avoid a car accident, this is a brilliant evolutionary adaptation. It makes you hypervigilant, it diverts energy to your muscles.
And then I assume the system powers down once the danger passes, right?
Crucially, yes, the
Yeah.
system powers down. But with a toxic work environment, you still have to go back to the office the next day. The danger never actually passes.
So the stress becomes chronic. It's inescapable. Here's where it gets really interesting. So if the brain is a city, the HPA axis is the air raid siren. You're saying that under chronic bullying, the siren doesn't just keep ringing, it eventually blows its own fuses, and the city's infrastructure starts collapsing.
That is exactly what happens. The hippocampus, which is critical for memory consolidation and emotional regulation, is absolutely packed with what we call glucocorticoid receptors.
Glucocorticoid receptors. Okay, and they interact with the cortisol.
Yes. You can think of these receptors like tiny chemical locks on the outside of your brain cells, and cortisol is the key that turns them. The hippocampus uses these receptors to measure cortisol levels and tell the HPA axis when to shut off.
So it's basically a thermostat for stress.
Yes. But when that cortisol flood never stops, the thermostat breaks. The toxic levels of cortisol literally suppress neurogenesis.
Meaning the brain stops making new neurons.
Exactly. The birth of new neurons stops. And worse, the existing neurons start to retract their dendrites. Imagine a healthy tree in winter pulling its branches back, shrinking inward.
Ugh, that paints such a bleak picture.
That is what your neurons are doing. The structure literally loses volume.
And the study pointed out that this damage was heavily concentrated in the left hippocampus specifically. Is there a biological reason why the left side takes a harder hit than the right?
There is, and it speaks directly to the nature of the abuse. The left hippocampus is heavily involved in processing verbal and declarative memory.
Oh, because workplace bullying rarely involves physical violence.
Exactly. The weapon of choice is almost always verbal. It's the rumors, the demeaning comments in meetings, the relentless, unfair criticism.
So because the target is constantly trying to encode, analyze, and manage these traumatic verbal attacks, that specific processing center takes a disproportionate, relentless beating.
That's right. The constant verbal processing literally exhausts that side of the hippocampus.
That makes a dark kind of sense. But I ran into something in the clinical data that I genuinely don't understand.
What's that?
Well, if someone is dealing with this chronic threat day after day, you would assume their cortisol levels would be sky high all the time. But one of the key studies we looked at showed the exact opposite for long-term targets.
Ah, yes, the hypocortisolism paradox.
Yeah. How can severe ongoing stress lead to lower cortisol?
You've hit on one of the most insidious paradoxes in trauma biology. You're referring to a 2009 study by Monteleone. They found that victims of sustained workplace mobbing actually had blunted cortisol responses and much lower baseline levels than healthy people.
So why does the body do that? If you're under attack, why turn the alarm system down?
Because the body is trying to save your life. Sustained high levels of cortisol are profoundly toxic to your organs over time.
So the body just hits the kill switch.
Eventually, the brain realizes the threat is inescapable, the environment isn't going to change, and you can't leave. So, to prevent acute toxicity, the body forcefully downregulates the entire system. It deliberately shuts the cortisol faucet off.
Wow. So it's a state of adaptive numbing.
Exactly. But that has to come with a massive cost, right? I mean, you still need a functioning stress response to get through the day. It comes with a devastating cost. This is what medical professionals mean when they use the term neuroendocrine dysregulation.
It sounds super clinical. What does that mean in reality?
In practice, it means your body fundamentally forgets how to regulate its own energy and stress levels. You might feel profoundly exhausted, but totally unable to sleep.
Like being wired and tired at the same time.
Yes. Or you might be sitting on your couch on a Sunday afternoon, completely safe, but your heart is racing and you feel a sense of impending doom. The system is just broken. Inadequate cortisol is just as dangerous for healthy brain function as too much cortisol.
Does this damage stay localized to those memory and emotion centers, or does this chronic state of emergency start affecting other neurological systems?
Oh, it bleeds out into how we literally perceive the world around us. That same neuroimaging study by Nolf found significant reductions in gray matter in the occipital temporal regions.
The occipital temporal regions, what do those do?
In neuroscience, this network is often called the brain's what pathway.
What does the what pathway actually do for us on a normal day?
It is the network responsible for identifying visual objects and extracting meaning from them. Crucially, it processes semantic memory and social cues.
Okay, so like reading a room.
Right. It helps you recognize a face and immediately understand the social context and emotional state attached to that face.
I have to challenge this because it sounds almost like science fiction. I understand how a physical blow hurts the brain, or even how a flood of toxic chemicals like cortisol does damage. But how does the mere act of visually scanning a room for a toxic coworker physically erode the brain's visual processing centers?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really comes down to the brain's energy economy.
The energy economy.
Yeah. The human brain only accounts for about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes 20% of your body's energy. It operates on a strict use it or lose it metabolic budget.
Okay, so it has to prioritize where it spends its energy.
Exactly. When you walk into a hostile workplace, your brain treats the office like a war zone. You are hypervigilant. You are constantly analyzing every facial microexpression for contempt, scrutinizing body language, anticipating where the next attack will come from.
So the visual system is essentially running completely hot all day long.
Exactly. And because the brain optimizes for immediate survival above everything else, it reroutes metabolic resources to keep that threat detection system fired up.
Wait, so it steals energy away from other things?
Yes, it steals energy away from the routine structural maintenance of those semantic and visual networks. The structural thinning isn't caused by the visual input itself, it's caused by the metabolic exhaustion of maintaining that level of hypervigilance for months or years on end.
Oh my God. It's sacrificing the long-term integrity of the building just to keep the security cameras running.
That is a very apt analogy.
And from what I read in the sources, it isn't just the brain that's sacrificing its future. This systemic stress reaches all the way down into our DNA.
Yes, we definitely have to talk about cellular aging, specifically telomeres.
Telomeres. Remind me what those are.
These are the protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes. A common way to visualize them is like the little plastic tips on the ends of your shoelaces that keep them from fraying.
Right. Okay. And they naturally get shorter as we get older, right?
Yes, every time a cell divides, those telomeres naturally get a tiny bit shorter. They act as biological timekeepers for how fast we age.
But the research from Ahola and Appel showed that the workplace environment can actually speed that clock up.
Dramatically. They studied workers experiencing severe job burnout and chronic psychological threat, and they found that this specific type of occupational distress measurably accelerates the shortening of those telomeres.
So the cells are actually aging faster than normal.
Yes. Even when the researchers controlled for chronological age, physical health, and lifestyle behaviors, the cells of people under severe occupational stress were physically older than their peers.
Wow. So the abuse literally acts as a biological time machine.
It does. It fast-forwards your biological clock.
Let's follow that timeline forward because this brings up a terrifying realization.
Yeah.
Say someone is listening right now and they recently managed to quit a deeply toxic job.
Good for them. That's the first step.
Right. They patched up their resume, they moved on, and they probably think they've escaped the hazard because they don't have to look at that abusive manager anymore. But the structural brain shrinkage, the cellular aging, does that just reverse itself when you get a better job?
Unfortunately, no. And this is where the longitudinal epidemiological data paints a very grim picture.
Grim how?
Well, look at the Kungsholmen project in Sweden. They tracked the health of workers over decades. They weren't just looking at short-term burnout. They were looking for late-life outcomes.
What do they find?
They found a striking dose-response pattern. Experiencing high job stress and a lack of control during your midlife peak working years independently predicts a massive increase in your risk for Alzheimer's and other dementias decades later.
Decades later. That is chilling. And another study in our stack by Andel and colleagues found the exact same correlation specifically for vascular dementia, right?
Yes. High stress in your 40s equates to an elevated risk of dementia in your 70s.
What is the actual mechanism connecting a bad job in middle age to cognitive decline 30 years later? Like, how does that bridge form?
The prevailing theory is a concept called cognitive reserve depletion.
Cognitive reserve depletion.
Right. Throughout our lives, healthy brain function builds up a reserve. It's structural resilience. When the natural pathologies of aging eventually begin to affect the brain, like the plaques and tangles associated with dementia.
A brain with a high cognitive reserve can fight it off.
Exactly. It can physically reroute its networks and continue to function normally for a much longer time.
So instead of thinking about cognitive reserve like a savings account that you dip into, it's more like the load-bearing pillars inside a building.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it. The chronic stress of bullying, the hippocampal atrophy, the gray matter loss, those processes are quietly knocking out several of your internal load-bearing pillars during your 30s and 40s.
Which means the building doesn't collapse immediately. You quit the job, the active stress stops, and you function normally because you still have enough pillars left to hold the roof up.
Yes, you seem completely fine. But 30 years later, the natural earthquake of human aging occurs. A healthy brain sways and absorbs the shock.
But a depleted brain lacks the redundant structural support.
Exactly. Because those pillars were knocked out decades ago by a toxic manager, the building caves in. The dementia symptoms manifest far earlier and far more aggressively than they would have otherwise.
This raises an important question, though. If we are dealing with an actual, literal biological hazard that causes structural brain damage and accelerates dementia, how do we clean up the spill?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because it seems pretty obvious that telling employees to take a deep breath or hosting a mandatory Friday afternoon wellness seminar isn't going to restore missing brain tissue.
It absolutely will not. The research is definitive here. Primary prevention is the only cure. You cannot medicate or mediate your way out of a toxic ecosystem.
So it requires structural organizational reform.
Yes. Some of the most fascinating data we reviewed came from organizations that finally treated this issue like a systemic hazard rather than an interpersonal quirk.
One of the examples that stood out was a large North American technology firm. They were dealing with a famously cutthroat culture, rampant burnout, and high turnover.
Right, a classic toxic environment.
And instead of sending their staff to resilience training, they actually audited their own internal systems.
They looked at the architecture of their workplace. What they realized was that their performance metrics were actively manufacturing the bullying.
Manufacturing it? How?
They were using a zero-sum evaluation model, essentially stack ranking. In order for one employee to get a bonus or a promotion, another employee had to formally fail.
Wow. When you set up the rules so that my survival requires your destruction, I mean, you are begging people to sabotage each other.
Precisely. So the firm didn't just tell people to be kinder, they completely dismantled the stack ranking system.
So what does this all mean for the day-to-day operations?
It means they redesigned their compensation and promotion metrics to reward team-based outcomes and cross-departmental collaboration. Once the incentive to destroy your peers was removed, the rates of workplace harassment plummeted.
That makes total sense. There was also a massive intervention in the UK healthcare system that focused on the investigation side of the problem.
Oh, this is a brilliant case study.
Because if someone actually reports a bully, the standard corporate playbook is often to just drag the investigation out for 6 months, right? Until the victim gets exhausted, loses their mind, and just quits.
Yes. The UK system recognized that delay is a weapon. So they instituted strict procedural justice. They implemented mandatory, non-negotiable 30-day timelines for all bullying investigations.
But speed doesn't really matter if the investigator is corrupt. I mean, in a hospital, if the person investigating the claim is the department head's golfing buddy, the victim is still going to be silenced.
Which is why the UK system added a critical second layer. They brought in independent, external investigators to handle these claims.
Oh, so they removed the conflict of interest entirely.
Exactly. They completely bypassed the local department hierarchies and the entrenched power dynamics. A localized manager could no longer sweep an accusation under the rug to protect their friend.
I think about the listeners sitting through a company town hall meeting, hearing executives talk about their zero-tolerance policy for bullying. It all sounds great on paper. But how does an employee actually know if their company is committed to procedural justice? Or if the policy is just legal cover for HR?
You look for the one thing that cannot be faked. Consistent accountability.
Okay, consistent accountability.
And the clearest example of this in the literature came from a Nordic manufacturing company. They decided to make human dignity a core metric on their organizational scorecard.
They literally placed it on the same level as financial performance and physical factory safety.
Yes, right alongside them.
But anyone can print a scorecard. What did they actually do?
The proof arrived when they discovered that 3 of their senior managers were systematically bullying their team.
Just normal middle manager.
No, these weren't low-level employees. These were high-performing executives who were bringing in massive revenue. They were the rainmakers.
And the company fired them.
They terminated all 3 of them.
Wow. That sends a message.
It does. If an organization will not punish a top-tier producer for abusive behavior, their culture is a sham. It sends a shockwave through the entire company when a rainmaker is fired for how they treat people.
It proves that no amount of profit and no level of operational excellence justifies interpersonal abuse.
Exactly. When a company enforces that boundary, they aren't just protecting morale, they're protecting the long-term cognitive health of their employees.
It fundamentally reshapes how we view the responsibility of an employer. I mean, we've mapped an incredibly dark path today, tracing how the structure of a boardroom physically alters the structure of the human brain.
It's a completely new paradigm.
We've seen how bullying is not a soft grievance. It is a physiological assault that shrinks the hippocampus, dysregulates the body's baseline stress systems, shortens cellular lifespan, and quietly hollows out the cognitive reserve we need to survive old age.
Recognizing it as a measurable environmental toxin is the only way we can begin to enforce the boundaries required to keep people biologically safe at work.
Which leaves us with a lingering, somewhat haunting reality to consider. Think about the demographic shift happening right now with the baby boomer generation.
Right, the massive wave of retirements.
Exactly. Millions of people are currently retiring and entering the prime window for age-related cognitive decline. But remember, this is the generation that spent their core career-building years in the corporate cultures of the 1980s and 1990s.
Oh, wow. The Wall Street era.
Yes, those were eras where ruthless, cutthroat behavior, screaming bosses, and relentless hostility weren't just common. They were actively celebrated in the business world as the pinnacle of strong leadership.
It really forces you to look at the current public health landscape through a very different lens.
It does. Based on the longitudinal data we've unpacked today, we have to ask ourselves, are we currently watching a massive, entirely preventable wave of dementia sweep across the population, all because of the normalized toxicity of corporate boardrooms from 30 years ago?
It's a terrifying thought.
That HR file isn't just a record of workplace friction. It might be a medical scan of our future. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.